She treated a man with a gaping wound. No ID, no insurance, just blood, pain, and silence. That's all it took for them to suspend her. No hearing, no explanation. She didn't fight it. She just folded her coat, walked out, and disappeared. But 4 hours later, a military SUV pulled up outside the ER. The man inside didn't need directions. He asked for Elena Cortes by name. If you believe compassion should never be punished, drop a comment for the ones who chose right over rules. And subscribe to hear the stories most people never get to tell. The wind pulled at the edge of her coat as Elena stepped off the hospital curb. In her hand, she carried her badge, now just a cold rectangle of metal, still warm from where her palm had pressed it during the walkout. She didn't slam the door. She didn't say a word. She just walked. Her shoes scraped pavement that suddenly felt foreign, and in the silence, she realized how loud leaving could be. 6 hours earlier, the emergency room had looked like any other weekday chaos. Machines beeping with mechanical indifference, fluorescent lights humming over the hurried shuffle of rubber soles and clipped orders. And then, like a shadow swallowed by noise, he appeared. Raymond Kessler. He moved as if the earth owed him resistance, one leg stiff, every step deliberate. The knee of his jeans was torn open, revealing a raw, inflamed wound streaked with dried blood and fresh infection. A faded jacket hung from his shoulders, too big for his frame, but unmistakably military, worn to threads, but stitched with history. The glass door hissed shut behind him. The ER stayed loud, phones ringing, names being called, but something about his presence pressed through it all. The uneven thud of his boot against tile, the faint smell of rust and old canvas from his jacket, the way the fluorescent light caught the raw edge of the wound on his leg. It made Elena look up before she even saw him. He approached the front desk without drama, without demand. "Just need someone to look at this," he said, gesturing toward the torn flesh on his leg. The receptionist looked at him, then at her monitor, and without lifting her eyes again replied, "Do you have ID? Insurance?" Raymond hesitated. "No." The answer was all the system needed. "We can't admit you. You're not in the system," she said flatly, already reaching for the next clipboard. That's when Elena looked up. She was finishing a triage note, but something in the man's voice, gentle but tired, like someone used to being ignored, made her pause. She stood. "Sir," she said, walking over, "come with me." The charge nurse caught her eye immediately. "Elena, he's not cleared. No paperwork, no consent, no billing profile." "He's bleeding," she said, already opening a side door. "You don't need a form to know a wound needs cleaning." Inside the small supply room, away from cameras and schedules, she sat him down. "This will sting," she said, peeling away the crusted fabric. He flinched but didn't pull back. His silence said more than a scream ever could. "Name?" she asked. "Raymond," he replied. "Kessler, sergeant, retired." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. She irrigated the wound, applied topical antibiotics, and carefully bandaged the gash. She didn't speak as she worked, only when necessary. But she did reach into her own lunch bag and hand him a protein bar. "You eaten?" He shook his head. "Not since yesterday." "You shouldn't be walking like this. You need follow-up." "I'll manage." "No," she said simply. "You shouldn't have to." He looked at her, eyes a little cloudy, but sharp beneath the fatigue. "You're going to get in trouble for this." "I'd rather answer for doing something than for doing nothing." In the dim light of the room, his hand brushed something out of his pocket. A small brass pin, shaped like a wing, dulled by time. It clinked against the tile floor. He didn't notice it had fallen, but Elena did, and she picked it up quietly. When she opened the door to let him out, he turned back and whispered, "Thanks, ma'am, for seeing me." He limped through the exit, disappearing into the late afternoon sun. 15 minutes later, Elena was paged to admin. There was no formal inquiry, no hearing, just a hallway conversation with two people she barely knew. Unauthorized patient interaction, unauthorized treatment, grounds for immediate suspension. She stood still, holding her badge like it still meant something. "I helped someone," she said quietly. "You broke protocol," one of them replied. "This isn't personal." But it was. They handed her a suspension notice. Security was called. She was escorted to her locker like a criminal. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She packed in silence. As she walked through the double doors for the last time, a janitor looked up from mopping and nodded once. Slow, deliberate. She nodded back. In the parking lot, Elena sat in her car with the engine off. A coffee-stained textbook on trauma care lay on the passenger seat. Her phone buzzed. Emails from colleagues, one offering vague sympathy, one avoiding eye contact through text. She reached into her coat pocket for her keys and felt the cool edge of metal, the little brass wing. She hadn't meant to take it, but now it sat in her hand like something ancient and alive. A forgotten thing, carried for years, dropped by accident. Or maybe not. She clenched her fist around it, then turned the key, and drove into a silence that felt like exile. In the hush of the car, her fingers still curled around the brass wing, she whispered, barely audible even to herself, "I'd still do it again. Every time." That night, the hospital stayed lit, its glass walls glowing like a hollow machine still spinning, bright, sterile, indifferent. Inside, the staff returned to their rounds, paperwork refiled, protocols unbroken. But something was missing, and not just a nurse. Whispers started in private chat threads and break rooms. A new intern asked, "Did she really get fired over a Band-Aid?" An older nurse, nearing retirement, replied, "No, over dignity." A tech shrugged, "She'll be forgotten by Monday." But not everyone forgot. By morning, Elena's phone was trembling on her kitchen counter. Notifications bled across the screen. Someone had posted her story online. Brief, raw, factual. Young nurse fired for treating a homeless veteran. No paperwork, no ID, just compassion. No names, no embellishment. But it caught fire. The comments came like rain on a tin roof. "My dad came home from Iraq and got the same treatment. God bless her. We lost someone who still remembered what it meant to care. This is what's wrong with the system. Paper over people." One message stood out. It had no sender, just text. "He saved my life. She saved his dignity. I'm coming." Elena read it 3 times. She didn't know what it meant, but somewhere, someone did. At 4:48 a.m., a matte black SUV rolled up in front of St. Vincent Medical. No sirens. No fuss. A man stepped out, straight-backed, quiet. The kind of quiet that makes people look twice. His uniform was crisp, his shoulders squared with 4 silver stars that glinted beneath the parking lot lights. General Samuel Draper didn't ask for directions. He walked through the ER doors like he'd built them. "Where is Nurse Elena Cortes?" he asked, his voice smooth but loaded. The security guard blinked. "Sir, she's no longer..." "I know, but I'm not asking about her job. I'm asking where she is." Word spread like heat. From reception to radiology to HR, staff leaned out of doorways. Phones peeked up from pockets. Nurses paused mid-sip. The general's presence pulled gravity into the room. Upstairs, Louise Gerber, the hospital's chief administrator, was still reviewing the previous day's incident report when her assistant burst in, pale. There's a general in the lobby, a 4-star, ma'am, and he's asking for the nurse. Louise rose, slowly. Her office, all clean edges and hollow plants, suddenly felt flimsy. For years, she'd managed crises like a conductor. Press, policies, HR statements. This felt different. This felt like a reckoning. She descended the elevator. The doors opened with a soft chime. Draper turned toward her. "General," she began, extending a hand. He didn't take it. Instead, he raised a small envelope. "This," he said, "is a formal complaint to the Department of Health and Human Services. And this," he reached into his jacket again, "is for Elena." The staff stared. Phones recorded. Louise's throat tightened. "Sir, this situation is under internal review. There are rules, processes." Draper's voice was ice wrapped in steel. "I know the rules. I've had to break them to save lives. Raymond Kessler saved mine outside Mosul, bleeding in the dirt. No helmet, no orders. He just ran." His jaw tightened. "And the nurse you fired didn't ask for a name or a form. She just did what he once did for me." He turned slowly, taking in the watching faces. "When I was pinned behind a burning vehicle, Raymond didn't stop to check insurance. He bled for people he didn't know. And last week, he walked into this hospital, and you turned him away." A hush fell over the lobby. Draper stepped forward, calm but dangerous. He was ignored, again, until she saw him. He held up the smaller envelope. "This is her invitation to speak at the National Medical Ethics Summit, and a job offer. VA Regional Emergency Liaison." Louise swallowed hard. "General, this is highly irregular." His expression didn't change. "So is punishing compassion." A nurse from the back whispered, "Where is she now?" A young orderly answered, "Outside, sitting on the curb." Draper walked past Louise without another word. The cameras followed. Elena sat on the low stone ledge beneath the ER's flagpole, arms around her knees. The sun hadn't risen, but the sky was bleeding gray. She heard the steps before she saw him. Boots. Measured. Precise. She looked up. The general stood before her, tall and still. He lifted his hand to his brow and saluted. "Corporal Cortes," he said with soft gravity. "Permission to thank you properly." She stood, slowly. "I'm not military, sir." "No," he said, "but you remember what we fight for." He handed her the envelope. Inside was more than paper. Inside was proof she hadn't been wrong. Behind him, the lobby windows reflected every face pressed to the glass. Doctors, interns, nurses, techs, watching something that wasn't supposed to happen anymore. Something human. Something right. Elena didn't open the envelope. Not yet. She held it like something sacred, not fragile, solid, real. Like finally being seen didn't need to be loud, just witnessed. Behind her, the hospital buzzed with attention she couldn't see but could feel. An invisible current shifting through corridors and badge scanners and break room coffee pots. Something had broken loose, and no one knew what to do with it. Draper stood beside her for a moment longer, then said, "Let me walk you back in." She hesitated, looked toward the automatic doors that less than 24 hours ago had shut behind her like a judgment. And then she nodded. Inside, silence rippled as they entered. Not the quiet of indifference, but the stillness of witnessing. Louise Gerber was still standing by the admissions desk, lips parted like she'd been holding the beginning of a sentence too long. Draper's presence, the envelope, Elena's calm return, it all seemed to unbalance her. Not publicly. Louise was too polished for that, but behind her eyes, something cracked. "Ms. Cortes," she began, "your suspension has been rescinded." The words floated into the air and dropped like dull coins. A few claps broke out, timid, uneven. Then a young nurse stepped forward and clapped once, loud and certain. Another joined, and another. The sound grew, but it wasn't celebration. It was protest. Polite public protest. Elena's eyes flicked to Draper, who remained silent, letting the moment weigh itself. Then he stepped forward. "That's not enough," he said, his voice calm but cutting through the noise. Louise blinked. Excuse me?" Lifting a punishment isn't the same as admitting it never should have happened. Her shoulders stiffened. "Then what would you have me do?" "Start," Draper said, "by admitting the failure wasn't hers. It was a system that forgot its purpose." Behind them, the mission statement on the wall, etched in glass, "Healing with integrity," seemed to mock itself. A beat of silence. Then Louise turned to Elena. I lost sight," she said. "I followed rules so tightly. I stopped seeing the people they were meant to serve. That's on me." Her voice shook, just slightly. "I'm sorry." And for the first time, Elena didn't feel like a nurse without a job. She felt like a human being who had bent, but not broken. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Because just then, the lobby doors opened again, and Raymond Kessler walked in. No cane, no limp. He wore a clean military jacket, the brass buttons polished, his posture straighter than anyone had seen the day before. He didn't say a word. He simply walked up and stood beside her. Louise turned pale. She looked at him, then to Draper, then back to Elena, as if trying to compute the weight of it all. But Draper stepped in again. "Raymond Kessler," he said clearly for everyone to hear, "served 3 combat tours, saved the lives of 6 men in a single day under fire, never once asked for recognition, and last week he waited 5 days to get help, not because he didn't need it, but because he was trained to endure." Draper's voice didn't rise, but the weight in it dropped into every chest. "That's who you turned away." The security guard from the night before stood in the corner, eyes down. The receptionist slowly lowered her gaze, and Louise took a half-step forward. "I didn't know," she whispered. "You didn't ask," Draper replied. "That's the point." Raymond finally spoke. His voice was steady, but carried a lifetime behind it. "She saw me," he said, nodding toward Elena. "That was enough." Then, from his pocket, he pulled something small and worn, a matching brass wing. He held it out. Elena reached into her own pocket and revealed its twin. No one had known he'd lost it, but somehow she had found it. He placed it back in her hand. "You kept it safe," he said. "Now I'm giving it back." There were no more speeches after that. No more press releases. Just a quiet understanding that something important had happened, and not everyone would understand it right away. But the right people had. And that was enough. 2 days later, the hospital installed a temporary sign outside the ER. "Review in progress. Compassion protocols for emergency cases." It was vague. It was corporate. But it was something. By then, Elena had already declined 2 press interviews. She wasn't interested in telling her story. She'd lived it. That was enough. But what she didn't expect was what followed next. Not from the public, not from veterans, but from within the hospital walls themselves. One by one, small changes began to take shape. A paramedic taped a sticky note to the break room fridge. People first. Always. A nurse started keeping a small emergency kit in her locker, just in case the system forgets again. And someone, no one ever confessed who, began slipping anonymous thank you notes into staff mailboxes signed with only one word: Angel. Elena returned to St. Vincent quietly, not as a floor nurse, but in a new role, created for her, pushed through by Draper's influence and the sudden public support. She was now the veteran liaison officer, a bridge between two worlds that often forgot each other. Her office used to be a converted supply closet. Now it had a window and light. Veterans started visiting, not just to be treated, but to talk. Some brought medals, some brought silence. One brought a faded photo of a squad he hadn't spoken to in 40 years. Elena kept them all. She pinned letters and drawings to a corkboard behind her desk. The board grew crowded, fast, each pushpin a reminder that doing the right thing was rarely clean, but always needed. Meanwhile, Draper had stayed true to his word. He didn't just get her rehired. He rewrote the game. 6 hospitals across the region adopted new triage protocols for veterans. No ID required for urgent care, immediate stabilization before administrative check-in, one-on-one veteran advocates assigned per facility. And then came the legislative draft. The Cortes Clause. Introduced by a state senator, it proposed legal protections for medical staff who made ethically sound decisions during emergency care, even if those decisions bent existing hospital policy. It didn't pass overnight, but it started conversations in rooms that had long gone quiet to stories like Raymond's. Elena kept her head down through all of it. She wasn't chasing credit. She just wanted fewer people to feel invisible. One rainy Tuesday, exactly 4 months to the day since Raymond had limped into the ER, Elena found a package on her desk. No return label. Inside, a small wooden frame. On the left, her original badge, laminated and cracked. On the right, the brass angel wing, mounted beside a handwritten note. Some rules are meant to be broken. Thank you for knowing which ones. There was no signature, but the handwriting was unmistakable. She placed it behind her desk, next to the corkboard. Didn't tell anyone. Didn't need to. That afternoon, a young resident knocked on her open door. Nervous, clipboard in hand. "Hi," he said. I've got a Marine in room 7, no insurance. VA's 2 hours away. Protocol says transfer, but he's not stable." Elena didn't rush to answer. She leaned back, hands folded. "What does your instinct say?" The resident looked down, then back up. "To treat him. Now." "You already know what to do," she said. He hesitated. "But what if I get in trouble?" Elena stood, walked to the door, paused. Then, with the calm certainty that came from breaking and surviving, she said, "Then I'll call the general." And somewhere in a quiet apartment across town, Raymond Kessler polished his boots. Every Thursday morning, he took the same bus to the hospital, always early, always in uniform. He brought 2 cups of coffee, one for Elena, one he left on the counter with a tiny flag stuck in the sleeve. When asked, he just smiled. Some wounds don't need stitches. They need someone who refuses to look away. And some people? They're not a story. They're a reminder. If this story reminded you of someone who once chose compassion over convenience, leave a comment for them below. Subscribe to This Really Happened. Because some truths don't echo until someone dares to listen. There was one last story Elena never told anyone. Not to the press, not to the interns, not even to Draper when he visited her new office months later. It was the story of the night she almost walked away. For real. 3 days after her return, long after the applause faded and the headlines cooled, she had stayed late in her office. The window caught the reflection of the empty hallway behind her, and in it, she saw herself, small, worn, barely holding. She'd taken out the note with the angel wing again, held it in her lap. And for the first time, let herself feel the weight of what had almost been lost. Not just her job, not just her license, but something far deeper. Her belief that the fight was worth it. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had been punished for caring, then thanked for the same thing, and now expected to carry it forward without flinching. The cost of integrity, she'd learned, wasn't always immediate. Sometimes it came later, in the silence, in the exhaustion, in the small, invisible moments when the world asked, "Do you still believe?" And you had to whisper, "Yes," without knowing if anyone would answer back. That night, she wrote something on a blank note card. She pinned it behind the door where no one else could see. The ones we save aren't always patience. She looked at it once more before leaving the office, and in the quiet corridor, she saw a janitor nod to her, just like the one who had seen her leave on that first day. Maybe it was the same one, maybe not. But this time she nodded back with something stronger than defiance. Grace. 3 months later, the hospital unveiled a permanent bronze plaque near the ER doors. It didn't mention Elena by name. It didn't have to. It read, "For those who act with compassion before protocol, you reminded us why we began." A small angel wing was carved into the lower corner. Beneath it, etched into the metal, was a line added by Raymond himself, without permission, without a vote. "We see you now." Elena stood beside it the morning it was revealed. She didn't speak. She just watched as nurses passed by, slowed, paused. Some touched the plaque. Others just looked. She noticed one young man staring at it longer than the rest. Later that day, he knocked on her door. "Are you the one they wrote that for?" he asked quietly. Elena smiled. "No," she said. "That's for anyone who ever saw someone hurting and didn't wait for permission to care." He nodded, unsure, then asked, "Will I know when it's the right time to act?" Elena thought for a moment, then replied, "You'll know. But more importantly, you'll feel when you can't not." He didn't fully understand. Not yet. But one day he would. And when that moment came, when the forms didn't arrive, when the clock ticked louder than the code book, when someone bleeding looked at him not as a stranger but a lifeline, he'd remember this hallway, this conversation, this stillness before choosing. And he would choose right. Not because it was allowed, but because it was needed. So let this story be a reminder that behind every badge, every white coat, every uniform or clipboard, there is a line we cross each day. Between safety and sacrifice. Between rules and right. Between forgetting and seeing. If Elena Cortes chose anything, it wasn't rebellion. It was remembrance. Remembrance of why she became a nurse in the first place. Why Raymond still wore his jacket even when the world forgot his name. Why Draper saluted not out of formality, but out of something older than rank, something earned in the blood and dust of sacrifice. And why one brass wing, dropped and forgotten on a cold tile floor, could spark a change no policy ever dared write. Because sometimes, the smallest things carry the greatest truths, and sometimes, one person who refuses to look away becomes the reason an entire system remembers how to see.